On a chilling February day in 1957, a discovery in a quiet wooded area near Philadelphia would soon haunt the entire nation. A young college student driving through the brush noticed a discarded cardboard box, a sight that seemed out of place and suspicious. He pulled over to investigate, and what he found inside that box would forever change the course of local criminal history. Lying within the box was the body of a young boy, estimated to be between 4 and 6 years of age. Abandoned and alone, the child appeared severely malnourished, and his small frame bore the unmistakable, tragic marks of prolonged and brutal physical abuse. Police arrived at the scene, horrified by the sight of a child who had been discarded like refuse in the cold winter air. The investigation began immediately, but the officers faced a wall of silence. There were no missing child reports matching the boy's description. Without any form of identification, the victim became known to the public and the media simply as the boy in the box. The case quickly escalated into a national sensation, with newspapers and television broadcasts spreading his image to every corner of the country. Investigators distributed thousands of flyers, hoping that someone, somewhere, would recognize the face of the small, unidentified child. They meticulously checked local schools, orphanages, and hospitals, searching for any record that might hint at his identity or his past. Countless families were interviewed, yet every lead hit a dead end, leaving detectives to wonder how a child could vanish so completely. It was as if the boy had never existed in the eyes of society, a ghost whose life had been lived entirely in the shadows. Evidence gathered at the scene suggested the boy had suffered immensely, with his hair appearing to have been recently and crudely cut. Scars covered parts of his small body, indicating a history of mistreatment that likely spanned his entire, short life on this earth. Investigators formed a grim theory that the child had been kept in total isolation, hidden away from the world by his captors. The mystery deepened as the months turned into years, with no relatives or neighbors ever stepping forward to claim the little boy. One of the most controversial leads emerged years later, involving a woman known publicly only by the initial M. She claimed her own abusive mother had purchased the young boy and kept him hidden inside their home for an extended period. According to her chilling account, the child was frequently subjected to horrific beatings and lived in a state of constant, desperate fear. She alleged that the boy eventually died following a violent incident involving a meal, a detail that investigators struggled to verify. Despite the gravity of her claims, the lack of physical evidence meant her story remained an unproven lead in the cold case. As the decades passed, the case became one of the most famous and frustrating mysteries in the history of American true crime. Generations of dedicated detectives took up the mantle, refusing to let the memory of the boy fade into the pages of history. They carefully preserved the original evidence, holding on to the hope that future forensic technology might one day reveal his true identity. For a long time, the boy was laid to rest under a simple grave marker that identified him only as America's unknown child. This haunting cold case became a symbol of a lost life, a silent plea for justice that echoed through the halls of the precinct. The breakthrough finally arrived more than 60 years after the murder, when modern DNA technology began to reshape the investigation. In 2022, after years of painstaking work, investigators finally announced that they had successfully identified the victim of this tragic crime. The little boy, who had been known as a mystery for over 6 decades, was finally given back his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. For the first time in history, the public could mourn the child not as an unknown entity, but as a real person. Genealogists had used advanced DNA analysis and exhaustive family tree research to bridge the gap between the past and the present day. The announcement stunned the true crime community, proving that even the coldest cases could eventually yield their long-held, painful secrets. One of America's oldest and most heartbreaking mysteries had finally been partially solved, bringing a small measure of peace to the story. Yet, even with his name restored, the investigators still faced the daunting task of finding out exactly who had killed him. significant questions remained, casting a long shadow over the success of the identification and the work that still lay ahead. Who was responsible for the abuse that Joseph endured, and how exactly did he meet his tragic end in that box? Why was nobody looking for him during those years? And who was the person who ultimately left him by the roadside? Authorities continue their investigation today, driven by the knowledge that they now have a name to guide their search for justice. The tragedy of this case is not just in the murder itself, but in the fact that his identity was lost for decades. It is a story about a child whose life was stolen and whose memory was erased by those who should have protected him. For most of his life, and for 60 years after his death, the world did not know who Joseph Augustus Zarelli was. Today, thanks to the persistence of science, he is no longer just a label or a cold case file in a drawer. He is a boy with a name, a history, and a story that has finally been brought out into the light of truth. But the mystery of who took his life remains one of the most haunting and unsolved chapters in American criminal history. Every piece of evidence is being re-examined with fresh eyes, now that the victim is no longer a nameless, faceless stranger. The detectives working the case today carry the weight of those who came before them, determined to find the final answers. The community that once stood by as the boy was buried in anonymity now stands with him in his quest for justice. It serves as a stark reminder of how much we owe to the victims who cannot speak for themselves in death. As the investigation continues, the focus shifts toward the people who knew him and the circumstances of his final, lonely days. The story of Joseph Zarelli has touched the hearts of millions, sparking a renewed interest in solving the crimes of the past. Technology has provided the key, but it is the human spirit and the refusal to forget that truly solved the mystery. We look back at the cold February day in 1957 with a different perspective now, knowing the name of the boy found. The cardboard box is no longer a symbol of his identity, but a reminder of the cruelty he faced in his life. Joseph's story is a testament to the fact that no one is ever truly forgotten as long as someone is searching. The path forward is difficult, but the progress made so far has been nothing short of a miracle for the case. We wait for the day when the final pieces of the puzzle are placed and the perpetrators are held to account. Until then, Joseph Augustus Zarelli remains a beacon of hope for all the other families still waiting for their own answers. His life, though cut short and hidden away, has now become a permanent part of our collective memory and history. The mystery of his death continues, but the mystery of his identity has finally been laid to rest at long last. The breakthrough finally arrived more than 60 years later in 2022, when modern DNA technology and advanced genealogical research changed everything. Investigators utilized cutting-edge genetic testing to compare the boy's DNA against massive public databases, finally identifying him as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. This revelation stunned the world, finally giving a name to the child who had been lost to history for so long. The identification of Joseph was a monumental milestone, yet it marked only the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. While the mystery of his name was finally solved, the circumstances surrounding his brutal death remain a profound and lingering tragedy. Authorities now face the difficult task of determining who was responsible for his abuse and why he was never reported missing. Detectives are still working to uncover who ultimately left him in that box, seeking answers that have eluded them for decades. Today, Joseph is no longer an unknown child, but his story serves as a somber reminder of a life cruelly cut short. His legacy remains an enduring search for justice, standing as one of America's most heartbreaking and significant cold cases ever solved.